The developments in AI have been driving huge increases in value in several companies in the AI market and large language models. I think it's a good idea for us to take a look at what's happening as some of the macro trends. And also, there have been recent developments in the space that call into question how long this expansion, how much we need as far as capacity in data centers. This is being called the next big speculative tech bubble, similar to what happened in the 2000s right after the Y2K issue was solved, and we saw tech valuations just fall through the floor. Many are saying we're ripe for this same kind of a thing. Lucas, did you have a chance to take a look at the paper I sent you, recently published by Stanford?
I did, and I thought it was very interesting. I've wondered what's going on with the AI bubble. I think it's right to call it so. I think there's a whole lot of speculation there. Money is chasing money. I've been concerned as to how that's going to resolve. I wonder what sort of benefits and uses AI is actually bringing. I think you probably see the brunt of the uses that are being brought in the world of software development. I don't know. There's so much that goes on in the political context of the world that has me worrying about uh, what sort of solutions AI is bringing and what greater problems they're creating in a world of political turmoil already. But tell me
Well,
tell me about this paper.
yeah, yeah. Well, before we get to the paper, I'd say tech has this very similar pattern where the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley get behind an idea, and it could be a good idea. It could be something which could be extremely valuable for the world, and they have the sense that this can be the next big thing. And oftentimes, the way that the market is developed is they will pour money into it for a period of time as a loss leader to try to drive out competition to the point where the world is dependent upon the thing or people are dependent upon the thing, and then they slowly raise prices and make that business very profitable for who's ever in that market. We've seen this in a variety of different sectors. I mean, this is almost exactly the way that Uber and Lyft started to penetrate, build their market. This is a way that several, big tech platforms have been built, where they dumped money in and then pulled the rug later as people were dependent upon it. One thing that I'm thinking about with respect to AI is we're starting to see companies shifting into this. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to replace swaths of their employee base with agentic AI or with AI solutions where, some low level operations, be it in customer support or if it's in, other aspects of the business, they're trying to increase productivity or try to do more with less, and then saying, well, we don't need as many people, or we can lay people off. We can realign our workforce based on AI. And a lot of this is predicated on AI being somewhat reasonably priced or cheap. But we're starting to see the cracks in that. As ChatGPT had a very successful model in their 4.0 model, people really liked it. But there's speculation that the 4.0 model was extremely expensive for OpenAI to run. And so they brought out a new model, which they touted to be an improvement on 4.0, which was ChatGPT 5. But many people disliked ChatGPT 5 and said that it was actually a regression, that the answers that they were getting were worse, that it was not operating in the same way that 4.0 was, and that they were relatively unhappy with it. And there was so much unhappiness with the new model that they started to complain, they started to cancel their subscriptions, and OpenAI capitulated and said, well, if you go up to the next level tier, then you can go back to the old 4.0 model and you don't have to use the 5 model. So that brought a bunch of people back. They started using it, and then they found that they were somehow being slipped ChatGPT 5 results, even though they had selected the 4.0 model. So it was speculated that the 4.0 model was so expensive to run that OpenAI would substantively lose money if they had a lot of adoption through the usage of this particular model. And this is where we start to really see whether AI as a business model can continue to exist if this is the way that it's being done. Many are speculating that the true costs of AI are much higher than what it's being sold as. And if you think about businesses realigning to using AI with this much cheaper cost model, it sets up a substantive trap because employees are not easy to acquire. A workforce is not easy to acquire. So as you start to lay off large swaths of your business and you start to become dependent upon this, if the price goes up, you're kind of trapped unless you're willing to take on the hard job of setting up your own cluster, getting your own models loaded up, and then running this all internally on your own compute or on your own resources. So if you continue to think about this as a SaaS model, it's setting up a very significant trap for the companies that are contemplating pushing all in on AI and realigning their workforce in this fashion. Now, the paper talks about some other aspects of how the entire ecosystem are set up, but let's start with that. Do you see how this lost leader, this trap that's being set up for a lot of businesses that are dependent upon AI could be something that's about to occur?
I do, and I think you're describing it very accurately when you call it a trap. When I talk about the broader context, also my worries as to some of the economic pressures that lead businesses into making these choices is where money actually comes from. We talk a lot about the Federal Reserve printing money, but a lot more money gets printed by banks who find people who believe in something in the future. A great ship on the horizon that has some magical cargo that everybody's going to get rich on. That, in some ways, is another way to think about these bubbles. And right now, this is the bubble. But there are larger problems, political problems, with what the structure is underlying that economy. So I worry whenever you describe that trap that they're also glancing sideways, or concerned about the structure of the system having some sort of disruption before they can adjust their business models into closing this trap on various various businesses.
Well, if we think about the bubble, NVIDIA is at the center of it as one of the businesses that's selling shovels. Whenever there's a gold rush, sometimes it's good to be the guys that are out there digging up the gold, but a surefire way to make money off a gold rush is to sell picks and shovels. This is certainly what NVIDIA has been doing. They've been selling the hardware that everybody uses to actually run AI. So there's kind of two things that you need to do in AI. You're training models, you're doing fine tuning, and you're also running inference. So there are these various operations that need to happen. And what's been going on with the bubble is as major players start to contemplate adopting AI, there's this sense that there will be increased productivity, that there'll be reduced costs, that all this really laudable stuff that all these companies want is going to materialize, and that there will be these set of companies that will be profiting from that. And what's been happening is there's kind of this circularity in the market where there are investments from Microsoft or Oracle. NVIDIA is certainly playing in the mix, and if you trace the money, it's kind of flowing in a circle. So if you think about, well, why is NVIDIA so highly prized? Like, why is it $4.5 trillion company or $5 trillion company? It's been driven by this thought that they're going to continue to produce all of the hardware that's going to run AI. We've seen some cracks in that where Apple has a significant play in the market with the way that they've been doing unified memory. There are other players in the market that are trying to chase this and saying, well, maybe GPUs aren't necessarily the best way to run this AI and whether it will be the future. And so right now we're starting to see that there's this circularity that's driving a lot of the valuation. But as we see papers from Stanford and some other people that have been looking into this, they're starting to call into question the way that the models have been developed and whether these will continue or whether there's a different approach. And if a different approach is taken and there isn't this insatiable demand for GPUs, then NVIDIA at the center of that might not make as much sense unless they're pivoting and going to be moving their expertise to the next thing. There's a lot of call into question about whether this can actually continue to go in the way it's been going. So this particular paper says that rather than fine-tuning models, what is a more effective way to do this is to have very substantive prompts that essentially light up a certain part of the model and make the model operate in a very particular way, and that doing this can yield better results, more consistent results. And this has been one of the things that businesses have been decrying about the way that AI works is it'll break out, like it has flaws in it. You can get the model to stop behaving correctly or in the way that you want and just start making it do generic stuff, or that it will provide inconsistent results. It'll just go off the rails and start doing something that you hadn't anticipated. And so these inconsistencies can actually lead to liabilities for the companies, as it might lead users to doing something incorrectly. It might lead users to giving them the wrong answer, or it might be offering up discounts or things that it doesn't have the authority to do. So some of this is in this paper that's been published says there are ways to approach AI that might help make it more consistent in the desirability that companies have for some of the use cases that they want to use. So it calls into question about how much compute we're going to need in the future, what it's going to take to run these models, and what the ecosystem looks like. And that's where I started thinking about what is the future of AI if you don't have to build as big, as many data centers, because you're starting to rethink or eliminate large swaths of what the compute infrastructure was being used for.
So you're saying this paper says that the fine-tuning and maintaining a broad comprehension in the LLMs is unnecessary. And
well, that there might be another approach to doing it, and that this is an area of research. So it makes a pretty compelling case for it, and I highly recommend it for people who are thinking about how AI might evolve in the future. It seems pretty substantive to me. Clearly, it's going to need to cook a bit longer. It's been published recently, but this is something that is being looked at by some of the top researchers.
well, it makes sense to me that we had the breakout of an LLM with OpenAI and their Chat GPT, but now we can begin to think about solutions of AI as being targeted rather than this monolithic giant. Do you have any idea as to what the computing requirements will be? Because if businesses say like want to have an agent that is answering phones or doing some sort of clerical tasks for the business, is this going to be something then that they can host if it's a much more specific in its context?
A lot of these models are self-hostable if a company was so inclined to do that. And if that was the case, if we started to see a lot of companies wanting to self-host their own models, you'd actually see a run on hardware, because right now there's not a lot of buying outside of the big companies that are actually running the models for and on behalf of other companies as a SaaS style model. If we started to see every company on the planet saying we need to have our own cluster so we can run AI models ourselves, that might drive a lot more GPU sales, or it might drive sales in hardware for whatever is the current most desirable configuration. As I mentioned, Apple has a configuration that doesn't rely on GPU that can actually run AI pretty effectively and run larger models than a lot of the lower end GPUs could run. So it's not clear that GPUs are the only way to do this. This unified memory model that Apple's been pursuing is actually a pretty compelling way to run a large language model, because now you can use the unified memory in a way that was before only really accessible on a GPU, because you need to run big parallel operations to run these things. So I'd actually expect to see more of kind of a run if we go that direction. But if the trap is set in such a way that businesses are mostly wanting to keep costs low by doing this SaaS, then I would expect to see that the trap be set up, and that we might actually see a deflation of the AI bubble as they try to raise prices, and then we see a scramble. So it's not clear exactly which way it's going to go. I can't give financial advice on how this is going to go or how to place the bet, but there's definitely some interesting trends going on with respect to how compute would actually be structured in the future, because training the models is almost like a one-time operation, and once you've got the model, then now you're into these other areas of either you're running the model because you're answering questions based on what the model's capable of doing, or you're doing these other type of operations to try to fine tune or try to make the models better.
You know, I've seen that the federal government took out a 10% stake in Intel, and I know that NVIDIA invested $5 billion in Intel. Do you have any idea of what the play, how they're positioning themselves with regards to what they plan, what they see in the future of AI between those two?
I think the Intel play is somewhat a protectionism of American companies. It's one of the last American companies that actually makes chips or was in the business of making chips. We saw throughout the 90s and 2000s and into the 2010s that most of the chip manufacturers over that 20 to 30 year period no longer exist or aren't in the business of doing it, even though that was the original meaning of Silicon Valley. Is we were making silicon, we were producing chips in America. That largely doesn't occur anymore. I think that that's more of why the US government stepped in and bought a stake in Intel, because it's just like when they tried, and I somewhat successfully, salvage the car industry, the automotive industry, when it looked like it might get completely devastated by winds that were unfavorable to the business. So, this to me feels like that's why the government stepped in. Now, why would NVIDIA step in and chase after that? I think you have a de-risking when you start to have an investment from something like the government, which has an unlimited amount of money. Once they've invested, I mean, they don't necessarily have to stop investing, and they're not going to run out of money. So is it a wise move for NVIDIA to chase on top of that? Well, it might be that NVIDIA is a bit nervous about whether GPUs can always be the future of this. Apple is making their own silicon. They're doing it in a completely different way. They might be feeling a bit that diversification of the way that they might be able to pursue AI in the future is a good move. So they might not actually have access to some of what they want to have access, except through something like Intel. And Intel was severely undervalued. I mean, the stock price had gone down substantially compared to Nvidia. So them putting an investment in when their stock has gone up so much, it almost feels like a no-brainer kind of a play.
We've also had Donald Trump's his announcements with regards to ratcheting up the tariffs with China again last Friday, and the longer running dispute over China cutting off access for American manufacturing with regards to rare earth elements that they mine and process in China. And I know that Donald Trump takes a lot of
That's set up for a long time. I think you were talking. We were discussing this, that the China seeing the rare earth situation was a long time coming for them. I believe that they've been plotting for this cutoff, or like trying to squeeze the American market out of rare earths. That they've been planning that for a while.
Since I mean, at least since 2008. And there was a meeting between President Putin of Russia and Xi Jinping before the Beijing Olympics in 2008, and we do know that there were plans made with regards to what Russia saw as American-sponsored aggression towards West, towards their border with Europe. So yes, that has been a very long play, and China, struck last December with barring rare earth exports to the United States for the production of missiles, but ostensibly we're still sending rare earths for any any other uses. But I don't know that I don't know. I don't understand why anyone would think that China is going to go out of their way to allow American companies to get an upper hand. So when I saw the play of the federal government backing Intel, I thought, well, they can read the writing on the wall. They understand that we need to have some sort of chip production here in the future. And again, I know that Donald Trump has taken a lot of flack for it, but he took a lot of flack for his tariff policies in his first administration, and yet the Biden administration did not walk any of them back. So I think if anyone has expectations that we're going to move towards back towards this global free market, I don't think that's going to happen. So does NVIDIA make all of their GPUs in China, or do they make any here in the United States?
I think that they're mostly making them in South Korea and Taiwan. I believe. I don't know that they're making them directly in China, and that's one of the ways that the U.S. has been able to control the export of those chips. That was one of the big sticking points, is that they didn't want a lot of those chips to fall into the hands of the Chinese, at least not en masse, so that the desire was to try and keep a lot of these out of the hands of the Chinese, so that there could be an upper hand for U.S. based AI companies. So I don't believe that they're manufactured in China, and that's one of the ways that the Trump administration has been able to have some leverage against the Chinese. I did note that Dubai, didn't they just purchase a whole bunch of chips for NVIDIA? That got some kind of a free pass, as far as I saw.
Yeah, I saw that Dubai purchased a lot of chips. I also saw this morning that the Holland, the Netherlands, nationalized, took over a Chinese chip manufacturer. And I don't know if it was based in Holland, but I do. Again, I think that we're seeing a broader regionalization / nationalization of many industries. It's not just the oil and resources that are being nationalized anymore. So,
well, I think one other thing to note is that at the beginning of this LLM trend, there was speculation that we're on the cusp of AGI, that this would lead to generalized intelligence, and that we would be moving into this zone where AI would essentially take over everything, and nobody'd have to work anymore, and it'd be running all of the thoughtful stuff that was happening. I think that we hit another kind of limit, and this oftentimes happens in the field of artificial intelligence, is that we make some progress, but then we start to stall out on, well, how far can that actually go? How much can we scale it? What are the problems with it, and how much effort does it take to surmount it? The LLM revolution in generative AI was kind of a breakthrough that happened, but we may be seeing that we don't have as much run with this style of technology as we had hoped, and everything that's happening with the hallucinations and the inconsistencies, some people are saying, well, that's a byproduct of how this actually works, and you can't get rid of it completely. It is part of how the technology works, and that this is just the way it is, unless we find some other way to have a different kind of artificial intelligence or a different way to do this. And there are also starting to be people who are saying that it may be increasingly difficult to keep these models working well, as the internet is no longer a place where information can be harvested from. If you feed AI results back into AI, you start to get very undesirable behavior. So as the internet is starting to get more and more populated with AI results, it may be that it's increasingly difficult to give it any kind of good data unless you're constantly curating good data by humans. So we might see that as this cottage industry that continues to exist, where somehow you have known humans doing known research, feeding into the AI, engine, and that you really can't harvest stuff generally off the internet. That might be the next kind of big move here, with players such as World AI, and even Julia starting to pursue this human internet, where you can prove that certain content is generated by humans.
I think it's reasonable to reasonable to expect sort of targeted AIs that this paper sort of directs attention to, that have a lower requirement for energy, for the amount of compute that they take. But I think you just put your finger on where we are going to see the focus of AI shift to for um, the next 7 years, or however long it will take. The question of where the data and what data is used to generate the answers that AI puts out, uh, is important for us to know, for understanding where those answers came from, but also um, who benefits from the input of the information. So um, I think that could be um, maybe where we see a shift towards excitement in AI, is moving over towards digital identities. We're seeing digital identities begin to be grappled with, understood. They were popular in Britain until Keir Starmer announced that there was going to be a company selected to provide digital identities for the British, and then the support and the excitement over that collapsed. We are going to you know whenever people turn over that specificity in information that's gathered about them, they need to have some sort of faith in government. I don't see that happening right now. That's going to have to build for a while. Um, Another place that I think we could, that, or from our discussions here, that I'm that I wonder if there could be any sort of developments there, are um, alternative types of chip architectures. And you mentioned the unified memory that Apple has. One, does anyone else have? Do any other computer manufacturers or chip manufacturers, are they able to replicate that unified memory? Are they legally not allowed to do so? And secondly, what about the field programmable gate arrays, the FPGAs? Have you seen any announcements in that area of hardware design?
The unified memory thing, I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that is equivalent to what Apple's been pursuing. And really, the only reason that Apple was capable of doing this is because they were in control of their own silicon. When they started to pursue their M series of chips, that put them in the driver's seat of how they wanted to pursue doing computing. And because they not only could produce the chips but put them directly into devices, they didn't really have to cater to a wide swath of customers. That was one of the things that Intel was doing, was saying, well, we can make chips and you can run Linux, you can run Windows, you can run Apple, you can run all this different stuff on it. And so they were catering to all these different customers, and nobody wanted a particular thing or wanted a program for some weird architecture. Now, Apple is in a different position. They can pursue the chips, they can pursue the software, and they can deliver it all within their own closed ecosystem. So I think they're in somewhat of a unique position to pursue a changing technology where I don't think there's a lot of other players that could even contemplate doing something like that. Maybe somebody like Samsung, if they were to pursue it in a similar way, might be able to pull something like that off. But I really don't see anything else in that arena that, or even in the world of tech that rises to what I would consider this style of architecture. As far as FPGAs, it's possible that we could see more specialized gear. That was one of the things that I was kind of discussing at the beginning, was whether there are other ways to run these models, or whether there are other more specialized types of hardware that can do this. I've certainly heard that Google and Facebook are pursuing different ways of doing this. They are probably the most likely companies that would produce their own hardware, that would produce specialized hardware for running these types of AI systems for the delivery of their products, and would need it at the scale that they'd be able to request it in a way that might be novel, or that might be developed in a way that is different from just buying commodity hardware. That has been the approach, is that GPUs are good. They're good enough that they've been able to run these models. But if you wanted to have increases in the capacity of the model, or if you wanted to have substantively different power requirements, lower, hopefully, then you might need to do this on very specialized type of hardware, which is not that dissimilar to what we saw in the crypto industry as we moved from GPUs to ASICs. That style of a move is what we'd be watching for. I don't know that it's FPGAs that are really that. I think it's a bit more exotic, because you need to run memory and compute in a very particular way and in parallel, and you kind of have to pursue that as its own tech, not leveraging a specific existing technology. It's likely GPUs are probably the best for what we've been doing thus far, unless you're into sort of this more exotic computing.
And what about, I know that or I should say, I've seen some chatter about the development of these data centers, where ostensibly AI data centers, um, from Meta, from Alphabet, Google, and various other players. Uh, are are those going in near energy resources? Does it are they going to Canada where it's cold? And are is when when I think about the dot-com bubble, I used to live in downtown Austin. There were several buildings that were half built, that were concrete shells that 15 years later got demolished, and they put up a federal courthouse in their stead. Do you think these data centers are going to be realized, and where are they? And do you think they're going to be realized? Like, uh, what are the odds on them actually lasting?
It, I'd say if history plays out, likely it will be not that great of an investment. That there would be some substantive advance that would occur that would make that seem like that was a bad thing to do to build that data center. A lot of this is predicated on that there is a lot of money to be made in AI, and that there are a lot of companies that are going to want to pay for this compute resources. If anything doesn't shake out exactly right in this, that there aren't a lot of companies that they feel that the AI results really aren't that good, that they can't leverage it, that there's too much liability, it could mean that there isn't as much demand. It's hard to say at this point, really, unless some of these other macro trends or some of these developments in the space of AI tend to point towards a different way to do things that meant that what they were building isn't right. It's hard to say that building data centers isn't the right thing to do at this point, because we've had an insatiable need for compute and for cloud resources. It just seems like that is what humanity needs more and more of, and I don't see that decreasing. So if you wanted my thought on this, I'd say building those data centers is probably the right thing to do. I don't know that building them in some of the places they're building them makes a ton of sense. They are very power hungry. They are very water hungry. The ability to cool these things is very difficult. So it seems like the only place to really build it is as cold as you can get. And I don't know that that's particularly the only place that they're getting built. Sometimes they're getting built because there's cheap power in the area. I know that at least in Arizona, this was part of what was happening, is they were building them next to the nuclear plant. So it's hard to say generally. You'd probably have to look at it on a case by case basis.
Well, I have your same. I'm dubious as to how those data centers are going to work out. I think they're going to fight some significant pushback in their areas because of their consumption of water, if nothing else. I I guess what as I think about AI in the future, I'm most excited for sort of that concept of AI specific machines, the ASIC miners of AI, FPGAs, and what might be possible there. So if you see any of that, let me know. And I'll keep an eye out. Likewise, I don't know if I have anything else. How about you?
Nope, I think that was a good roundup for kind of what's happening with LLMs, the AI bubble, and where we might see things going in the future. So fun conversation, and I think that's all we've got. So we'll see you next time on FOMO.